Math and English do not always work in the same way, and they're actually both fields that I did for my undergraduate work. So it's very important to kind of compartmentalize sometimes, because in English there can be a lot of nuances of meaning, and in math we say very clearly that you need to interpret some symbols to mean a certain thing. And then we have classes where we have word problems, so we're putting English and math together, and you've just got to remember that when you're dealing with math, the math rules apply even if you're dealing with a word problem. So as we go through here, this lesson 3.2 is really about putting these connectives together into sentences, and we're not right now going to try to evaluate it. So right here you see the Cheshire Cat from what I think is just a great cartoon and so many different things. We're going to use logic symbols, and we're just going to rely on the symbols. You're not trying to evaluate whether or not they make sense or how silly it is. Just what does the symbol get interpreted as? And so, one of the great things, I think the Cheshire Cat says, Alice says, which way should I go? And he said, that depends. Where do you want to get to? She said, I don't know. He said, well, it doesn't really matter which way you go then. He was using logic, even though the whole idea of him being there is a nonsense sort of a factor. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're going to apply our logic. These are the key focus symbols of today. So that little wave, the tilde, is not. When you see, it's almost like the letter A, but it doesn't have that cross hatch right there. So it's kind of like the outside of the letter A. That goes with and. When you flip and over, we get the V. So it is or. Then we have a single-sided arrow and a double-sided arrow. The single-sided arrow we typically just read as if, then. There will be something in front of the arrow over here, and that is our if part. And then whatever follows the arrow is the then part. And just say, I can't draw that on there very well, but the arrow is going to essentially be where this then is. So it'll be if whatever's in front of it, then whatever follows it. It's not going to be very critical when we're just reading these sentences about the sufficient and necessary, but when you do your homework, you will have some sections that ask you, what is the sufficient part? What is the necessary part? So to kind of help you out, I've just put a couple of little things in the blank there. The first part, the part that you're going to find in front of the arrow, is sufficient. The second part is what it refers to as necessary, and that's sort of a strange thing to get used to, but if A, then B means A is sufficient to cause B to happen. But just know if the first part, then the second part, same thing, if sufficient, then necessary. Okay, and a double-sided arrow is if and only if. If and only if is particularly well suited to use for definitions, because if it's a definition, it could go either direction, and when you have an if and only if, it is both sufficient and necessary, and it doesn't matter which side you're on, both sides are sufficient and necessary for the other side. And I know that sounds really strange, just kind of getting going, but if we've got a both-sided arrow, then they could both be sufficient, because it doesn't matter which side we're going on. They could both be necessary. It doesn't matter. You'll also have some questions that ask you about the most dominant connective. And right now that we're not seeing these things put together, but when you have the most dominant connective, that means you're going to have more than one of these symbols used. The most dominant one is not in parentheses. Do keep that in mind. Okay, so if we have a couple of ands and we have an or, there's going to also be parentheses. The most dominant is not in parentheses. So we'll try to come back and look at that. So now we have some statements. And this is very typical of your homework also. You're going to be given some statements. They're just little short statements. They have letters out beside them. And then you're going to translate these statements into symbols. And so one of the things you want to do is just focus on what each part of it is. We have, it's raining, it's Saturday, we're finished, she's rich, and you're human. So when we go down here into our practice then, it says, if it's raining, okay, it is raining is P. It is Saturday is Q. And we have an if then. So what's going to happen is we have if P, then Q. And that should match what was on that previous. We have an if then. We are finished. We are finished is R. It is Saturday is Q, but this time the connector is OR. OR is the one that looks like a V. So we have we are finished, or it's Saturday. Now our next sentence here has the negation in it. You are not human. So the negation is that tilde symbol, and then the rest of that says you are human. You are human is the statement T. So you are not human becomes not T. And, okay, and is kind of like a capital A without that crossbar, so that's and. She is rich, so that is statement S. You are human, and she is not rich, or it is Saturday. Now this one we have both an and an or, but one of those is dominant. When we don't have parentheses, you have to determine which one of those it is. The comma actually kind of helps us with that, because this that has that comma separates those two parts of the sentence. You are human and she's not rich. That goes together as indicated by that comma. And we would do that over here for the math also. You are human and she's not rich. And then close parentheses, or it's Saturday. Now I know that doesn't make any sense. We're not looking at the logic of it. We're just trying to translate it at this point. And if your homework were to ask you which one of these is dominant, the or is the dominant, because it's either this case or that case. And then in the first case, we have an and. You're human and she's not rich. So we have a dominant connective on the outside of those parentheses, and the comma will help you determine where that parentheses needs to go. Another practice, translate it into words. Now I'm not going to try to write all of this out. I mean, it would look atrocious as we went along. So we're just going to have to focus on these. Every time we see a Q, which they don't always start with Q, but they almost all start with Q. Q has to do with it being July the 4th. R is the barbecue. And then whenever I see this little tilde, I'm going to put that in there. But don't forget, I will write this up in the corner. We've also got to remember that if it's got that outer part of that A, then that's an and symbol. And if it's the one that looks like the V, that's the or symbol. And then I'll write that on here also. So then we also have the tilde means not. So we're remembering that from earlier. Number one, it is July 4th, and we're not having a barbecue. Number two, it is not July 4th, and we are having a barbecue. As I just pause here, you will have homework like this. This is why I'm practicing it. So there will be sentences where you have to pick out which sentence is the correct translation. Number three, it is not July 4th, or we are having a barbecue. Number four, it is July 4th, or we're not having a barbecue. Those numbers 5 through 8 have arrows. These first two are single-sided arrows, so this is our if-then statement. R is we're having a barbecue. So if we're having a barbecue, then it's not July 4th. Number 6, if it is July 4th, then we are not having a barbecue. This is making me hungry. Number 7, it is not July 4th if and only if we are having a barbecue. That means it's really true both directions. It wouldn't matter which side you are started on. But that the double-sided arrow translates as if and only if. So number 8, it is July 4th if and only if we are not having a barbecue. This one, notice that we have to do the and then it's negated. So there's a couple of ways you could read it, but one of it will sound a little bit better. So I could say, it's not true, for number 1, it's not true that, and then we move into the parentheses and say, Romeo loves Juliet and Juliet loves Romeo. That's probably the easiest way to do it, is just say it's not true that, and then put the other things together. So number 2, it's not true that, notice when I've got these parentheses, that's the easiest way to go about it. It's not true that Juliet loves Romeo and Romeo loves Juliet. Now, once you don't have parentheses, like on number 3, we could probably just put the word not in to negate. Romeo does not love Juliet, and Juliet loves Romeo. Number 4, Juliet does not love Romeo, and Romeo loves Juliet. Whereas on number 5, again, the dominant thing here is the not. So we say, it's not true that. And then kind of pause and we just don't say the other words as strong. It's not true that Juliet loves Romeo or Romeo loves Juliet. Now that's a different kind of a thing if you're thinking about what it means. If we've said or and we've said neither one, we've said it's not true, then really neither one of them is true. But we're going to talk about that in the next section. Number 6, it's not true that Romeo loves Juliet or Juliet loves Romeo. Number 7, this one I don't have parentheses, so instead of saying it like that, I'll just stick the word not in there. On number 7, Juliet does not love Romeo or Romeo loves Juliet. Number 8, Romeo does not love Juliet or Juliet loves Romeo. Number 9, Romeo does not love Juliet and Juliet does not love Romeo. Number 10, Juliet does not love Romeo and Romeo loves Juliet. Actually, I think number 4 and 10 are the same. But that's okay. This is what the summary is. This might be a little bit fuzzy if you're looking at it. I copied and pasted this directly out of the online textbook, which again, you can get to. If you have questions about how to get to it, just email me. You all have access to that and some other additional videos and different things there, so just let me know. But if it just says not P, then there's a couple of ways to say that. I just said not P, but it is not true that P. If you put the word and there, it means P and Q. Now, even though it says that this is a very common translation over here, I'm kind of putting a dotted line through that because actually it's correct, but it's not very common. P or Q. If P, then Q. That's the way I read it. P is sufficient, so the first part is sufficient. P is sufficient for Q. Q is necessary for P. So the first part is sufficient. The second part is necessary. Biconditionals are if and only if. Again, those are the ones that are great for definitions, because you could say, like, definition, a triangle is a polygon with 3 sides. Well, a polygon is a triangle if and only if it has 3 sides. Okay, you can put an if and only if in there. But if we've got it double, then they're both sufficient and necessary. P is necessary and sufficient for Q, but you could just as easily, since it's going both directions, say that Q is necessary and sufficient for P, but they're going to start with whichever one they list first. Now, it's very critical that if you only have one arrow, the order makes a difference, and that's what that note says down here. If P, then Q, does not mean that Q couldn't happen without it. For example, the statement, if it rains, then I will give you a ride, would imply that when you get rain, I'm going to give you a ride. But it doesn't mean you can't get a ride under any other circumstance. So you have to be careful on the order there. Okay? Okay, and that does finish 3.2. 3.2 is just about translating. Just translating which connective is dominant, which one is sufficient, and which one is necessary. Sufficient is listed first, necessary is listed second, and if you have more than one connector, it's the one that's not in parentheses that is dominant. Whenever you have a sentence and you've got a comma, then the entire grouping of the phrase that goes with that comma has to go in parentheses together.